Go. All right. Well, welcome everybody to this webinar of the Eastern South Central Colorado District and anybody from beyond the borders of our district. We're glad to have you uh, taking advantage of this opportunity. We have been wanting as a district leadership team to hold some webinars in response to the listening sessions that we had last fall, and buildings and property were one of the key questions that came up. How we deal with them, and we have churches across the district and represented here with us on the Zoom tonight, in various stages of the conversation around the role that our facilities play in our ministries. And so that this is going to be kind of an introduction to this conversation and how we have the conversation in our local churches, and looking forward to then kind of developing it further at our district gathering on April 5th. That's a good segue to introducing our guest. Stephanie Moffitt is with us here this evening, and she is a staff person of the Mountain Sky Annual Conference who works in particular with developing fresh expressions of ministry and with our Table for All project here in the annual conference, and she'll say more about what all that means later. But we're really glad to have Stephanie with us, and she will be again with us in April. And this is an ongoing thing, and I will just and I'll make a plug later on for kind of a Part B webinar that we're going to have in a month and a half to take on some technical aspects of our facilities and how we utilize them. So I'll say a little more about that, and we'll promote that more over the next month. But I want to, without further ado, hand things off to Stephanie. And Stephanie, welcome, and we're glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I am grateful for the opportunity to be with all of you tonight. And like I said, I have met a few of you before in various ways. A little bit about me. I serve, like Chris said, on our conference staff with a really long job title, but basically, uh, translated job title means that I help people, and help, I use that idea loosely. I come alongside churches, congregations, and people who are having some dreams about being church. Not necessarily doing church, but being church in their communities. And my role is to support whatever they are dreaming, whatever God-sized dream that they have grasped onto and are pursuing in their community. That's how I like to say it anyway, rather than the long job title that I have. Um, Also, a little bit about me. I have experience in my career, and I counted this up recently, and I think it would be helpful for you all to hear. I've worked with uh, 9 different congregations throughout my career of various denominations, um, who have all been on a church revitalization or church planting journey. Of those 9, 4 of them were true from the ground up church plants, and then the other 5 were congregations who were asking big questions and trying some new things and taking some risk and experimentation. Um, and so I come at this work with a passion for having fun and playing and really dreaming and using your imagination as much as possible. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'm excited to be with all of you tonight. I live in Carbondale, Colorado, so within the bounds of the conference, but not really close to many of you, I imagine, across on the other side of the state from your district. So I will be there in April for the district gathering, like Chris said. Tonight's I've put together some slides, and we're going to have a couple of group discussion questions, and I'm going to share some stories with you. But I do want to say that tonight's um, conversation and information comes from a book. It's this book. I realize it might be backwards for you, but it's called Fresh Expressions, People Over Property. And towards the end, I'll drop a link in the chat where if you don't already have this resource and are curious about this topic, this is an excellent place to start. So with that, let me start by sharing my screen. Make sure I use the right one. Okay, you should see just the slideshow view. Is that right, Chris? Are we on the right one?
Yes, you got it.
Thanks. So this conversation of people over property and reimagining how to be the church is one that matters right now. I think that the state of the church and the realities that some of our congregations are facing have either pushed us willingly or unwillingly to a space where the priority of finding balance between mission and property is probably at the top of the list for some of us. And so tonight, my hope is to spend time with you talking about three sort of big pieces. The goal of this conversation is to rethink church property as a tool for mission and to look at what's coming in the future to continue the conversation. This information tonight is an introduction to the conversation. We are not going to spend the next 45 minutes or so solving all the problems and giving you a prescription for where to start necessarily, and exactly a plan, step one, step two, etc. Because all of our contexts are different and we are all in different places with our congregations. But the big key takeaway is that this conversation is important and it's one that a lot of us need to be having. A lot of churches across the denomination are having this conversation and other denominations. A few weeks ago, I spent about 4 days with a group of Presbyterians and the whole week was about this exact topic also. So it's not the idea of what do we do with our buildings? What do we do with our church buildings is not singular to the Methodist denomination. It is a shared thing, just with what's going on in the landscape of church these days. So I ask you to hold that piece that this really truly is an introduction to the work. We'll talk about a few key insights from the book. Again, People Over Property by Audrey Warren and Ken Carter Jr. Start maybe rethinking church property as a tool for mission. And then also, like I said, look at what we're hopefully the ways that we can stay connected as your congregations might have this conversation. So the big question, I think, I said a minute ago, whether we've been willingly or unwillingly pushed to this conversation is this idea that is our property a burden? And the more that I talk with churches and leaders in churches about how things are going, which is a big part of my work, this idea that property as burden comes up a lot. There are, let's see, make sure I click the right thing here. Nope. Sorry, guys. I clicked, there we go. Many churches are facing shrinking attendance alongside growing maintenance costs and financial constraints. And when that imbalance between what we spend on buildings versus what we spend on ministry and outreach and building relationship, there are unintended consequences. Probably not something we ever really set out to do when our churches were formed. We never imagined, probably, and I say we as collectively, we never imagined that keeping the lights on was going to be the main concern when churches formed. And another piece of this is that a lot of us are emotionally attached to our church buildings and the things that have happened there and the ways that we've been formed by what's happened in the church, what our experiences have been. And sometimes that can inform the way that we make decisions about how we spend our money on church buildings. And that really is part of the work of the conversation around this issue. So these three areas are really where that question of property as a burden comes into play. And I have a story to share with you from the book, actually. And so I'm just going to read. This is on page 13 and 14. So the book is framed, it's 7 chapters long, and the authors go through different sort of stages of life that churches find themselves in. And this is towards the beginning of the book. And so they're writing about Paul. And so I'll just read what they write because they really get at the heart of this idea that property as burden was maybe perhaps never the intention. So let me read. Paul was clearly the most influential missionary in the New Testament. It seems appropriate that Paul funded his missionary work first by physically making tents, as we learn in Acts chapter 18. Yes, Paul used his hands for his side hustle, which was making tents to sustain his mission of spreading the gospel. The tent life gave Paul flexibility to move across the Gentile world. Tent making is a theme in stories old and new about freedom for God's people. More than simply a physical dwelling, the tent is an essential strategy to help the church reimagine its mission and sacred space. And then continuing on, page 14. Tent life, or living the tent life, the approach of tent life, requires courage to do something new. And one might wonder why this is needed. One might wonder why we can't simply keep doing what we have always done. We are in a new place, and yet we have not even moved. This challenge pertains to denominations as well as congregations. For example, the suburban sprawl is catching up to many churches in rural North Carolina. The church has not moved a location, but the land around it is filling with strip malls and housing developments. And the way we have always done things isn't enough. Indeed, it's no secret that the old ways are only as old as the memory in the oldest members. And so I highlight that portion of the book here towards the beginning because there is the practical and the emotional parts of this conversation when we think about what it means to use our buildings for mission and ministry. And we all have stories, and those stories are important. And we also have what God calls us to and how to live that out and be the church in new ways as the world continues to change. And so I think it's an important place to begin the conversation to recognize what the problem is and in our local context, the degree to which these things do play a role. So I want to open it up for discussion here and maybe hear from all of you just real briefly. I'm going to stop sharing for now. One question I have for you to consider, and you can put it in the chat or say it out loud if you feel comfortable. You have no obligation to do that. But I'm wondering what the biggest challenge with your church property is that comes to mind. Yeah, go ahead.
It's obviously bigger than we need. And
Yeah.
because of that size and the fact that we have not completely paid it off, that the sum of the mortgage and the maintenance is a much too large portion of our income.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, go ahead, Elise.
Utilities and insurance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, insurance is a bear. More like a beast, probably, in some circumstances. Thank you, Elise. Yeah, Neil,
And
go.
and beyond that, we're partway through the process. But what we're really coming up against now is this business of people's attachment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's more, it's not so much physical, but it is in a way, it's a recognition they've had experiences, religious experiences there, which they come back to, and it reignites those for them.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert. Or Neil, sorry. Yeah, Nancy.
I think also it's for many of us the realization that it's the older members of the church that are keeping things going financially as well as physically. And we know that their ability to do that will probably not be around that much longer. So
Yeah.
trying to help the younger members to understand the financial and the physical problems of keeping the building, which right now other people are doing. They are not doing it. So they don't particularly understand it.
Yeah. That's an important aspect for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, Stephanie, this is Clark. I think what I would add, Rob and I are part of the same congregation, and maybe what I would add to what Rob said is, yeah, there's an attachment certainly in our life, my life, but the mortgage. Yes, the church is currently bigger than it needs to be, but it also represents tremendous opportunity to our community, and it is quite utilized, but it's not paying the bills by the people that are utilizing it, if that makes sense. Rob, I think you'd agree with that probably.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've had experiences in churches where, or in communities, the one I live in actually now, the church is sort of known around town for being the cheaper option to host an event, right? And because of the way the church understands itself in the community, they're willing to stay at that lower limit in terms of cost to rent because they are interested in being available and that sort of thing for the community. And sometimes that's a hard balance to strike and a hard conversation to have. Like, how much of the market do you try to meet to cover your cost for something, right? So yeah, totally legitimate. Anyone else? Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that you shared what I've seen for sure. And what my hope tonight too is to demonstrate for you. I actually have a couple of other stories to share with you. Demonstrate some ways of rethinking these challenges. And the question after hearing these is, how could we reframe these challenges a little bit, like Clark said, into an opportunity? How could we turn those challenges into something that is outside of the box of what we're already doing and always have done, right? And move more towards that mindset of continual adaptability, continual experimentation and trying new things. So let's go back. I'm going to reshare one again. And actually, you all sharing your challenges will help me understand too in April when we continue this conversation. So thank you for that. So I want to spend just a minute or two thinking about a theological perspective of what it means to align our property and our mission. I just read a little bit about Paul's approach and how he funded his ministry. He made tents, and there's other ways that um, it's worth the time and the work around having those conversations within your congregation to create more alignment between mission and ministry and property. And I think that, remembering that the church is a movement, it's not a monument, it's not a place. One of the chapters in the book is called Museum Life and compares the reality that some of our churches are like museums rather than vibrant, full of life places on the regular from day to day. And it's important to hold the idea that resources exist to serve people, not institutions. And I think that's a big part of our work in the church to remember. And I think we can remember what John Wesley had to say about the idea of parish, right? He said that all the world is his parish. He didn't say that one church building or even one community, right? He didn't limit the idea of parish to any sort of structure. And I think throughout time and history and the way we have organized ourselves in some ways has been a detriment to remembering that. And so this is an opportunity, again, taking the challenge that we have and claiming it as an opportunity to remember what we are called to. So again, this dynamic movement of being church, not simply doing church, serving people, not institutions, and asking the bigger questions of how is our property a ministry tool? I'm going to read one more thing. This is from page 34 in the book. And this gets a little bit to what Neil was describing about holy experiences in church buildings. As stewards of holy space, whether tent or temple, we are accountable for whether the space transforms the people inside of it and beyond the four walls. The emphasis is not so much on what makes the space holy as whether it leaves those who enter it with a new window to interpret the world as holy. When we encounter God in the temple, we are being trained to perceive the image of God in every person. The light that dwells in the gathered body of Christ is also present in the world. And the idea of temple life teaches us about the permeability of holy space and human space. And I really like this chapter in the book. They start with tent life and then they talk about temple life, and that's the chapter that these words come from. But there is a theological assumption that is easier to grasp than the alternative. The easy thing to grasp is that I go to church and that's where the holy stuff happens, right? It's more challenging to say, I'm going to go out into the dog park and there's going to be holy stuff that happens there. And I think it's worth remembering that holy is in every place of the world, every part of the world. And that's a little bit of what this work calls us to reclaim in some way. So that's a theological lens that and Neil, I was encouraged to hear you describe that and to really hold space for that, because when we can break down our assumptions about where we experience God or where the holy stuff is in the world, I think it allows us to let go a little bit of our expectations for our buildings and our sanctuaries. So in the work of reimagining property for mission, there's generally three places that people start, right? They start on housing, they start around ideas of housing, nonprofits, or co-working, entrepreneurial space, sharing offices with business, like a sole proprietor or something. And there's a key question, though, that really can push us to think beyond these three pathways, but it all relies on paying attention to the community that you're in. And that's why this work is going to look different in each community. And some of the ways that these three pathways play out is turning a building into affordable housing with a developer, or partnering with a community nonprofit to offer, for example, a tutoring service in the church. Like, I've known many churches who would partner with a local school and figure out how to offer tutoring services. Or renting out an office. Like, if the church used to have, 10 classrooms and there's no children filling those classrooms, easily turn them into co-working environments. We actually have a church in our conference in Salt Lake City a few years ago who recognized a mental health crisis in young people in the community, and formed a partnership with a mental health collective that's made up of therapists who join the collective. And I guess it's like a practice of mental health practitioners, but they're all licensed. And I don't know exactly what their organization is, but the church partnered with that collective in a way that they offer, they turned, I think, 5 or 6 of their classrooms into mental health offices for therapists working with youth, particularly in the community. And so that's one way. It's one success story of how they've turned what they had into aligning their mission with what was going on in their property. But the key question really truly is figuring out who needs space in your community. And in some ways, doing this work of people over property is really hard without this question, without doing the work it takes to answer this question. And sometimes answering this question is only for a season, because things change. I think if anything that we actually do know is that things are going to keep changing. And so continuing to grow in relationship and asking this question can continue to guide and create balance between using your property for mission and ministry. And I want to spend a few minutes showing you some other examples of things that I've learned about. Each one of these examples had a challenge. Most of them were facing declining attendance. They created some kind of shared space, and the impact, the outcome of making the decisions that they did, notice that it wasn't increased worship attendance. But each one of these stories that I'm about to share with you, the impact of the decisions that the church made actually increased community engagement, and in my opinion, increased the ways in which these places were being the church and where they found themselves. So I'm going to share a different screen at this point. We're going to start here. So this first example I want to share with you is from the Presbyterians. It is called the Pres House, and it's on the campus of the University of Wisconsin. And what they ended up doing was taking, I think, a campus ministry building, and then we're not going to watch this video, but they turned it into intentional living for a student population. And as you can see here, like, this is their schedule of events for different things they have going on. And the the one thing I wanted to highlight about their story was, you see their mission to be a spiritual home at the heart of the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus. And that's a very simple, understandable, straightforward mission, a spiritual home in the center of a campus. And, you can find this and keep reading more, but everything that they do, every decision they made to provide affordable housing and intentional living for the students came through that lens, right? And the idea here under this photo, we aim to build not simply a campus church or a campus ministry, but a home, a place for all to come and explore, a place where anyone can find a place to rest, a place that is shaped by everyone who wants to lend a hand. And so if you interpret that, they really are pointing back to their mission to be that spiritual home. And I'm reading this as a place where they can serve their community also, right? They offer ways that students can share meals together, they can do mission work together, they can give back to their community, and be at home in some way. And I highlight this because it's important that the decisions we make regarding property are through the lens of mission. So without clarity there, it again becomes harder. Without understanding who needs space or who needs what, and then not understanding the mission, again, makes this work harder. This next example I want to show you is called the Wilmington Kitchen Collective. And this is not the homepage. I'll go to the homepage real quick and show you. It is a community-based project dedicated to empowering holistic transformation by providing affordable, high-quality commercial kitchen facilities, business development, and economic support to culinary entrepreneurs. So what this, let's see if her picture is here. So how this kitchen collective began was that there was a church planter. I bet she's somewhere. There was a church planter in Wilmington. Her name is Chelsea. And she was planting a church that didn't have a building. And so they would meet throughout Wilmington in different places, bars, bowling alleys, coffee shops, this sort of thing. And she actually was connected to a couple of local churches. But one of the things that she was paying attention to are the people coming to her church plant were actually entrepreneurs, people who are trying to start their own food businesses. And they didn't have a place. It's really hard to grow, let's say, a cupcake business out of a home kitchen, right? It's actually more helpful to have a commercial grade kitchen, lots of space and storage and all that sort of stuff. And so she started having conversations with the two partner churches that she already had a relationship with. And what they did was to form a new nonprofit called the Wilmington Kitchen Collective. And part of the church plant's ministry and who they are is to run this collective. And so what they do is they have entrepreneurs rent kitchen space, and the way that their business structure is set up is the rental fees, a portion of all of it goes through the kitchen collective and then back to the churches where the kitchens are being rented. And so it's low cost shared kitchen facilities. They do offer startup grants for entrepreneurs and they do business training because an entrepreneur sometimes doesn't have that full skill set, but they make really great cupcakes and they just need a leg up to get off the ground. But they bring in business experts and folks who help the entrepreneurs form an LCC or sole proprietorship or set up their business structure, and classes on taxes and making profits and all that sort of thing. But again, I'm highlighting this because, in their mission statement, but then also their goals, you can see how these things are related. They knew who needed space. They identified what their mission was going to be, and they used what was already there. I met Chelsea a few weeks ago, and she went through about 18 months of transforming one old decrepit church kitchen into state-of-the-art, brand new facility, essentially. And then she had another, like a third church come to her later and say, I wish you would have come to us first. We just renovated our kitchen and you could have just used that. And she couldn't believe it. She was like, oh my gosh, I would have saved so much time and money if I had just started there. But now they've actually added a fourth church in the space that is part of the collective and supporting the entrepreneurs. So I highlight these two examples to hopefully spark some creative energy for you. But I also want to show you and tell you about, these places are far away and they are places that you might be thinking are very dissimilar to where you find yourselves. They're in big cities, lots of people all around. It feels like there's opportunity galore. But the next two stories I want to tell you are about churches in our conference. And the first one is Cedar Edge. I always say it wrong because I'm from Atlanta originally. I say Cedar Edge, but it's Cedar Ridge, I've learned, or something closer to that. Cedar Edge is one of our Table for All churches. And over the course of working with them, they, again, have been really intentional about figuring out who they are and what they have and who needs what in their community. And that you can see right on their homepage of the website what they're about. It's not quite a mission statement, but it might as well be. And I really love this line at the end. Our job as followers of Jesus is to extend God's welcome to all. And then if you start learning about what they have going on, I want to share with you one thing they have started that's new. They offer what's called the Gathering Place once a week in the town, in the community. And I'll just read how they've described it. A welcoming space at the church for seniors to come together, play games, crafts, share stories, and enjoy each other's company. And it takes place every Wednesday from 12:30 to 4. So the way that they got to the place of saying, yeah, this is what we're gonna do, was that there was a location in town that had been a food delivery site for Meals on Wheels, where seniors in the community could pick up food to last them a few days, I think. And they were shutting that distribution place down. And so the church said, well, what's going to happen to seniors getting access to food in this way? And there wasn't really a solution. And so someone at the church got in touch with the right folks and was able to reconfigure how to make the church location the drop-off site. And then they started realizing, that started happening, but then they realized that all of these seniors picking up meals for themselves were really isolated and having a hard time finding a place to belong, and feeling like they wanted to be around other people. And so the church renovated, and I use the word renovated lightly. They got some furniture donations. They bought some new lamps that were very inexpensive. I think they even replaced light bulbs to make it brighter, like that one simple step. And they added some light paint, like new coats of paint and that sort. It was not a renovation in terms of tearing down and rebuilding, but they renovated the space to create more hospitality and welcome, and started telling the seniors who were picking up lunch, why don't you stay for the afternoon? Like, we're going to be here hanging out. That's what we're doing. And we would love for you to join us. And they've had such good turnout from this particular initiative that folks have actually started coming to worship on Sunday morning, but that was never the intent. That was never the goal they set out to achieve by doing the gathering place. They were simply meeting the need that they identified, that people were picking up food anyway and needed a place to connect with others. And then the last church I want to share with you is in La Junta, and you might have heard of some of the stuff that they're doing because I know that they're in the district. One of the things I want to highlight is they've actually done a lot of work on the website, and again, right on the homepage, you can see what their vision and mission are. They clearly, and I've worked with them, they are also a Table for All church, but they have done work around what they're about and who they are in that community of La Junta. And their website, I've watched it over recent months, and it matters when you can be who you are up front, and people know how to find the information about who you are and what you offer. They've increased how they promote, like their promotion efforts for renting their building. They've added these new pictures to give people a sense of the spaces that are in the building, as a way to just communicate a little bit differently. And then one of the other things that they did recently, one of the projects was, it was a picture that was sliding up here. They hosted grocery bingo for the local college. And so they had church members donate grocery items that, college kids frequently need, like laundry detergent or ramen noodles or soda. I don't know. And then they hosted bingo night, and they had kids come and they played bingo and won sacks of groceries, which I just think is a really fun way of. So this picture is bingo night that they hosted. It's a fun way, again, of seeing who's in the community and what the need is, and then responding appropriately, thinking outside the box. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And, I share those stories not, again, because the idea is that any one of those things is your answer. But there could be an idea for you that comes from knowing about what other places are doing. And I think it's exciting when we hear these ideas and it sparks something within us, but then we don't know where to start. Well, how do I begin? How do I, yes, recognize this problem and know something needs to change? And I know I'm not going to have grocery bingo, right? Like, we don't have a college. So where does that leave us? Or I'm not on a university campus. So what are my options? So the next minute or so, I just want to share that exact process with you. Where to start? What's the starting line for this work, and how to engage? So the very first step is to take, and it sounds like some of you are engaged in this already based on the question you answered a few minutes ago, but really taking a look at the picture, assessing not only what your property use is, but assessing things like, we have a large sanctuary and we spend, an hour and a half in it every week out of 7 days. So what percentage of time is the sanctuary being used? So taking an assessment snapshot of building use is actually a really helpful tool. And then also putting that next to a mission and vision statement, and asking questions about, well, if our mission is to be a community hub where lots of things are being offered, but we're using our sanctuary for an hour and a half once a week, do those things make sense next to each other? And that's where the conversation of assessment is a helpful one. And there's lots of different things you can assess. There's building use, there's assessing what your mission and vision is, assessing what your financial capacity is, assessing what the capacity of your volunteers are, assessing what the capacity of your pastors is, or the capacity, the margins in your budgets. Where is there wiggle room in budgets and line items and that sort of thing? So the idea of assessment is a big one and can take a long time or a short amount of time. Usually I work with churches and we identify an amount of time we're going to spend assessing and what the things are we feel important are to assess. And then the next step is asking who needs to be part of the conversation around making decisions to create more cohesive alignment between mission and ministry and, say, the budget or the building or staff. And then you start having the conversations, and that's where the generative creative thinking comes in. So understanding the groundwork, understanding the larger picture, and then starting to engage in a process of saying, does this still make sense? Is there something we're not thinking about? Is there someone we're not talking to? And this is where that key question of who needs space is part of the work. And then you start taking some risk, you start exploring. And I put on here, consider leasing and partnerships, just because, this is people over property. So property is the key component here, but really exploring mission and ministry all together as a package, and where there is greater alignment or not, and then being willing and committed to try new things, to do some tinkering, to do some experimentation. And that's where, again, if you try something, it's always worth going back to that assessment, evaluate and assess how something goes to see what other possibilities there are or changes along the way need to happen. So when we talk about this work and where to begin and where to start and how to get going, there are strategies involved, but a lot of it has to do with the context that you're part of, that your community is part of. So I want to stop here and ask this question to see a little bit, gauge a little bit where we are, and ask you all to respond again if you feel so inclined. Is there a creative way your church could use its property differently? Is there something that you've imagined or talked with someone else about a creative use for your property? Has that come up for any of you? Yeah, Elise.
We have a daycare preschool program, and that uses a lot of our space, but we can work in use of our building by community groups. We have several women's groups, an AA group, and we often house work groups that come to the community to do
Nice.
projects.
Yeah.
But I think there's more we could do.
What's the more then, Elise?
Well, maybe get some paying people to share our building. I
Okay.
don't know who that is. Like you say, it takes a lot of work to get that to happen.
Yeah.
Well, people who use our building do pay something towards utilities mostly. I mean, it's not really a rental fee, even though we call it that.
Yeah. Yeah. Cover the basics probably. Nancy. Thank you.
The problem that we face because of that daycare is that it limits to a fair degree who we can ask to be in that building with us.
Right.
And we've talked in the past about our homeless population and and our immigrant population and that sort of thing, but we always run up against the daycare and that who is allowed to be in the building when the kids are there. So it is underwritten a lot of our ministry because financially it's a big asset. But it's also a big stumbling block when it comes to the use of our building.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, it's not uncommon because of the regulations to keep a certification status for a preschool or a daycare. There are certain state regulations you have to abide by, and you all, I mean, you all know this. Like, you have, I don't think they're called inspectors, but you have evaluators from the state come unknowingly sometimes to do accreditation, right? And understand what's going on. Yeah.
And then continuing on with that story, and we were all three same church. We've kind of decided really what we really would like to sell and get a different layout, build something else, but not all are in agreement with that, and we're trying to work through that. But one of the big problems is the church was built in 1964. Okay, and now how do you bring it up to snuff? We've done some things. We've xeriscaped. We've done stuff with the lighting and this, that, and the other thing to help us, but there's no way you can take that building and make it into an energy efficient building. And so looking at the future, we're kind of locked in with that space and what we can and can't really do to help ourselves. And where do you get the, and then there are other things as it gets old, that age, things start falling apart. You need to replace this, you need to replace that. And we've gone through some of that, but we don't have the people and the money financially to make those kind of big investments to keep the property operating at a level that it should be. Difficult.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of my initial questions, given that scenario, would be, are there parents of children in the daycare who have sets of skills that would benefit the church? What do you know about the parents of the children?
We've asked them, I mean, it's been a while, but we asked them to really help care of the We Care yard, and have a work day once a month to break things up or what. No response.
No response. It happens once. We originally we had this crazy idea that, if we had We Care, we'd attract people to the church for no. We've had the We Care for over 30 years. And it has not attracted people to being part of our church. They just drop their kids off and that's it.
Well, because the daycare solves a problem for them to be able to go to work, right?
So they can go to work,
Right. And so
I would say we are pretty much in the engage category now. I think, at least as far as the leadership goes, they've done the exploration part of it. And now it's a matter of having those conversations. And as what you're talking about, really identifying our mission, and not so much how our building can be used for our mission, but what our mission is and how can we do it whether we have that building or not.
Yeah. Yes. So one of the questions I ask, it usually comes up in a series of workshops and presentations, just working with congregations. At some point, the question comes up, and I can never predict when, right? But it always does. What if we didn't have this building? How would we continue to be the church? And answering that question is really insightful, right? And letting yourself imagine what that would look like, what that would be, what that would mean is one of those exercises in letting go a little bit too. So I bring it up here because it sounds like that might be a place in your engagement that it would be a helpful question.
I think we've actually already done that to quite a degree. We have 3 different possibilities of
Mhm.
of what we can do in the future. There may be others, but we have three main ones. So that discussion has already happened as well.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Nancy. I appreciate the sort of zooming in on y'all's situation. Thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts about creative ways to use church property? I actually have one I have two more stories to share with you. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, we may be in the unique position where we have so much space,
Yeah,
literally have two churches.
yeah.
We could literally split our church by levels. And
Mhm.
the upper level could be either us or a new church, and the
Mhm.
other level could be either us or another church. Because we have an old sanctuary and a new sanctuary. We have old offices and
Yeah,
new offices.
yeah.
We have old classrooms and new classrooms. We kind of share a dining area event space, but even that could be shared. So
Mhm.
my personal view is that's something we really need to look into seriously.
Yeah. One of the things I was going to mention, I've actually come in some research I've done lately is I have found a number of congregations who who've been able to find developers or entrepreneurs or people who want to run nonprofits. And these organizations are aligned with the church's mission and where the church understands itself. And they've been able to strike agreements in which they sell the building to the nonprofit that are missionally aligned and then rent back worship space.
Hmm.
And so it's an inverse relationship than what we typically think about between church and community partnership, right? Where if it's more cost effective for a church to rent worship space in a building they've always been in, that's sometimes a no-brainer, right? Because then you're not the one paying to keep the lights on or fix the roof or fill in the blank in some way. Yeah. That's what you reminded me of. And then we actually have another church in the conference who is currently in negotiating contracts with the city where it is. It took a series of decisions to get where they are, but they decided to sell their parsonage for quite a bit of money. And then their sanctuary church building was actually on two different lots of land within the city limits. And they similarly found a developer and architect who are very interested in creating affordable housing in this town. And so they have partnered with the developer architect firm to and this is where they are in the process. They're working with the city to subdivide the lots, and the architect developer is going to build 10 affordable housing units and also tear down the existing the sanctuary structure and rebuild, in addition to the 10 units, another structure that is a community gathering place with a worship space as part of it for the congregation. But the way that it's being paid for is that the architect and developer are fronting the cost for the 10 units, and the church will retain 2 of them, but then the other 8, the developer architect will either sell or rent or have a property manager or this sort of thing. But the reason it worked is because of the affordable housing issue in this place where it's very challenging. Housing costs is just very challenging. And so the church was able to find that partner who was missionally aligned with something that was important to both of them again.
Hmm.
So another idea to maybe spark the creative energy for the rest of you. Anything else? Anywhere else that we're anything that's been sort of an aha moment for you in this conversation? Yeah.
The only aha is that we looked into doing exactly what you just described, because we
Yeah.
have, our lot is 6 acres.
Oh,
We
wow.
only use about 2 of it.
Mm-hmm.
We thought there's a nice big chunk right down here on the road would be great
Yep.
for housing, townhouses,
Yep.
any number of one of things.
Yep.
But the city will not allow more than one water source per lot. And water is very tight here, as it
Yeah.
is in the Springs. I noticed we have someone from the Springs.
Yeah.
So we ran into just a giant roadblock. I
Mhm.
suppose, if you had the right developer that had the right
Yep.
connections and so forth, that
Yep.
could actually take it all the way up through city council, you might
Mm.
get a variance for that. But
Mhm.
our immediate answer was,
No. So I have another story to read for you, Robert. And I'm glad you mentioned 6 acres because that's some land to do something with. So this is again in the book on page 59. And I'll do a brief version of it. While land is hard to come by in big cities, it's plentiful in rural communities. Some churches not only have a building but also have a lot of land. Some bought the land hoping to expand, and others purchased many acres to one day have a cemetery. Still other churches receive large acres of land to fill in of land in wills and gifts. One church in the rural Midwest had a lot of land, and like other rural communities, the town was becoming more of a bedroom community in a local suburb. Um, the pastor of the church where this town is an innovator and entrepreneur, and often wondered what could be done with the land. The answer came through his own wife, who told him what she and others needed. Most Sundays, after Don returned home from worship, his wife would head out the door with their dog. And one week, he saw her packing up to leave and noticed she had a bunch of cupcakes. He learned the cupcakes were not for him, but for dogs and puppy parents. Each Sunday, his wife headed out to a dog park in the next town over, which was 20 minutes away. And that specific day, one of the dogs had a birthday, so she signed up to bring cupcakes. And Don learned that his wife was part of this interesting dog community. The dog group met weekly, cared for one another, and ate with one another, and did a lot of things that a church does. So Don went to his church leadership with the idea of creating a dog park on its land. The church members had mixed emotions, but it didn't matter because they didn't have the money for it. So Don offered to write the grant proposals that he had found. He made a deal with the church that if he could find the money, it would provide the land. And so within 1 month, Don had a large grant from the city to pay for the entire dog park, and the city would maintain the park. And the church made good on its part of the deal and allocated the land to the city through a land lease. So the dog park is now a gathering place for their community. The church holds services at the park and hosts an annual dog park festival that draws over 120,000 people every year. So the church let go of some land and in turn has earned a lot more money than the land is worth through the festivals that they host, which actually fund the mission and ministry of the church. So just an idea about land and what you could do with a surplus of 6 acres. Not suggesting you make a dog park, but maybe ask the city if they're planning any new bike parks or dog parks or what's on their city planning agenda for the future. Just another way of thinking about it. I've got one more slide to share with all of you, and it's just to talk a little bit about what's happening in the coming weeks and months. Let's see. I think a key idea to remember just from this conversation and ongoing is that church property should be a means, not an end. And it feels like from the way that you all have gathered tonight, that's something you all are leaning into as well. So I encourage you to sign up for the district gathering that's happening because this will be an ongoing conversation. And there are a lot of conference resources that we have available. At the district gathering, I will be there offering another workshop to continue this conversation, going a little bit deeper. And then part of my job is to work with congregations on this work and of course involve Chris as the district superintendent, and what this work looks like, and how we can collaborate with you and support you as you engage some of these new ways of being and thinking. And I've listed my email address over here for you if you want to jot it down. And I'm more than happy to do a follow-up meeting with you, or come visit you, come see where your church is and what kind of place it's in and who's there and who's not, and take in the big picture. So just know that that is available. And yeah, that's what I've got. I'm really grateful that I was able to join you all and be here and get to know you and hear what is going on with all of you. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah. Okay. So we have, maybe we'll take 3 minutes, and if you've got something burning on your heart and mind that we want to say before we close, Robert's got his finger up, Nancy's got hers up. Robert, why don't you go, and then Nancy.
This falls into the aha moment.
Oh yeah.
I think
Good.
what I got out of this, it reminds me a lot of my dad, who was the classic entrepreneur and always studied lots of motivational techniques and so forth. And really, a basic tenet of business and going into business for yourself is you look for a need and then you fill it.
Mhm.
And it sounds like to me that's what you're talking about with the building. You look to your community and find the need, and then you figure out how you can use your building to
Yeah.
fill that need.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks,
Nancy?
Ross.
Stephanie, because of recent events and political events, I'm wondering, has there been any discussion about grants drying up, or the lack of resources out there for churches that want to do this sort of thing?
Yeah, so I can only speak to the grants that our conference would give folks, congregations. And I can't speak for the cabinet conversations that have occurred around this, but my assumption is our intention in the conference level, at least, is to continue funding innovative ministry, serving all people, serving all populations. And I think there could potentially be grants from the denomination that take shape differently given nonprofit status, and but I wouldn't know. I've not heard any of that yet. So that's my non-answer answer at this point. I don't know if Chris has anything to add. I think our conference's intention, though, would be continue funding ministry and that addresses the mission of our conference. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the conference, the district, we don't have huge pots of money for this kind of stuff. So big projects we're not really able to do a whole lot with, but we have a number of different sources for smaller grants from, anywhere from 2 digits to 4 digits, size grants. And so, and sometimes more depending on what it is. So, yeah, if there's a project that your church or a church nearby wants to undertake, let's do some asking and digging for some dollars to at least help it get started, right?
Yeah.
All right, anybody else? Those are great. Thanks, Nancy. All right, very good. Well, I am really grateful for you all, and why don't we close with a prayer? And then I always like to end these meetings with a chance for everybody to unmute and say goodnight to each other. So, so let me say a prayer, and then we'll everybody can unmute and we can call it a night. Oh, Susan.
Oh,
For some reason I can't hear you, Susan. It doesn't say you're muted, but now it says you're muted. Now try.
Don't forget the.
oh, there she is.
I almost heard you there.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, very good. All right. Okay, let's pray. Gracious God, thank you so much for this day and for this evening and for the siblings in faith who have gathered on a faithful search, seeking out ways that we are able to use the tools and the resources that have been granted to us to serve you in your kingdom, grateful for Stephanie and her leadership here tonight, and for all of the folks in our churches, all of our laity and our pastors who are working so hard to do your work in our communities across this district. It's in your son's name we always pray. Amen. All right. Oh, right. That's okay. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Yep, I actually pulled up my calendar to make sure I said something, and then I didn't. So the next opportunity for this, obviously, oh no. Oh, we're still there. Okay, good. Sorry, my cursor went the wrong place. The district gathering is going to be April 5th for continuation with Stephanie, but then on March 29th, no, 27th, March 27th. Sorry, it's a Thursday evening. We're going to have another webinar where we will have our conference chancellor, Matt Weber, present, and probably a couple of other folks from the district who will talk in particular about some of the legal aspects of using our building in different ways. So tax liabilities and insurance requirements and stuff like that. Some of the nuts and bolts of all this. So that's March 27th, again, 6:30, and we'll be getting more out about that over the next month. But just want to, for you all and anybody who's viewing this later, to know that that's coming. So thank you, Susan, for lifting that. All right, everybody, why don't you unmute and let's say goodnight.
Thank you, Chris.
Right,
Stephanie.
Welcome.
Chris, thank you,
Good night,
guys.
everyone.
Good
See
night.
you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.